mother, Priya, once offered me a piece of wisdom over lukewarm tea, a statement she intended as a comforting balm for a future she perceived as ordinary. "Not everyone is meant to be a star, sweetheart," she had said, her voice gentle, laced with a pity I was too young to recognize. And that's perfectly fine. Someone has to be there to applaud for the ones who shine. I was 19 at the time, my uniform still so new it felt like a costume, the fabric stiff with a pride that was mine alone. She didn't mean to cleave my world in two, but those words became a quiet, insidious soundtrack to my life. They were a kindness she was doing me, an attempt to preemptively soften the blow of a life she was certain would be lived in the shadow of someone else's brilliance. The sentiment, meant to be a permission slip for mediocrity, instead felt like a prophecy I was doomed to fulfill. Our family, the Sharmas, had a pantheon of stars, and I was not among them. We were a dynasty carved from military discipline, 3 generations deep in the soil of Fort Hood, Texas. Duty wasn't just a job, it was our family's religion, and the chain of command was the scripture we lived by. My father, Raj Sharma, had retired a full colonel in the army, his posture still as rigid as the day he left the service. My mother had served her time as a triage nurse, her silence on the matter as profound as any medal for valor. My younger sister, Kira, was the true heir to the legacy, a rising major on a fast track to command, her every achievement a public spectacle. And then there was me, Anya, the eldest daughter, the quiet footnote in the grand, decorated history of the Sharma family. To them, I was the quitter. The story they told themselves, and anyone who asked, was a simple and convenient one. I had been accepted to the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point, only to wash out after the first year. The official narrative was that I couldn't handle the pressure, that the rigorous discipline had broken me. They concluded I simply didn't possess the requisite grit, the unyielding fortitude that was the hallmark of a true Sharma. The silence that followed my departure was heavier than any reprimand, a thick blanket of disappointment that smothered any attempt I made to explain. They saw a daughter who had walked away from greatness, and in their eyes, that was a failure from which there was no honorable recovery. They never knew the truth, because the truth was a secret I was ordered to keep even from them. I didn't leave West Point. I was taken, plucked from the ranks by unseen hands and absorbed into a covert intelligence program so deeply classified it had no official name, no budget line, no public existence. It was known only to its members as the Orion Group. There was no graduation ceremony to mark my transition, no framed certificate to hang on my parents' wall of achievements. My new life began with a one-way flight to a part of the world that never appeared on travel brochures. For the last 2 decades, I hadn't been absent from their lives by choice. I had been meticulously erased from them by necessity. The price of serving my country in the shadows was to become a ghost to the very people who were supposed to know me best. My existence became a tapestry of high-stakes operations woven in the forgotten corners of the globe. While my family imagined me filing paperwork in a mundane government office, I was coordinating drone surveillance over hostile territory in the Sahel, my heartbeat a steady drum against the tension of imminent danger. I once spent 72 hours embedded with local assets in a Yemeni safe house, the air thick with the smell of cardamom and fear, orchestrating an extraction that saved 3 captured journalists. There were no parades for successes like these, no medals for the lives brought back from the brink. My rewards were the quiet hum of a plane safely leaving a contested airspace and the continued anonymity that kept my future missions and my family secure from my enemies. I maintained a fragile, almost transparent connection to their world. I sent birthday flowers to my mother, the order placed from a secure terminal in a bunker thousands of miles away. A Christmas card would arrive from my father, bearing a generic stamp from a Maryland post office box I'd never visited. I watched from this immense distance as Kira climbed the ranks, as my cousins married and had children, their lives unfolding in a series of bright public chapters on social media. I wasn't in any of the pictures. A well-meaning aunt once told me about a family portrait where I had been digitally cropped out. explaining that it was done simply to balance the frame. They believed I quit because I wasn't strong enough, never knowing the strength it took to watch my own life from the outside. Then came the summons. It was autumn, the Texas air turning crisp, the leaves clinging to the branches in a final desperate blaze of color. My encrypted phone buzzed with a call from a number I knew by heart. It was my mother. Her voice was brisk, stripped of warmth, like a duty officer reading a prepared statement. "Kira is being promoted to lieutenant colonel," she announced. "The ceremony is next month. You should come." A pause, then the inevitable addendum. "Just try not to wear anything that draws too much attention. This is her day." There was no "we miss you," no "we'd love to see you." It was an order wrapped in an invitation, a reminder of my designated role in the family drama. I simply said, "I'll be there." That evening, I stood before my closet, the decision of what to wear feeling as strategic as any mission plan. Tucked in the back, encased in protective plastic, was my old dress uniform. It was an immaculate ghost, the fabric crisp and untouched, preserved as if awaiting a ceremony that was never held. For a moment, I imagined wearing it, walking into that celebration and letting the uniform speak for itself. But that wasn't my way. That was Kira's way. Loud, public, and demanding of recognition. Instead, I carefully selected a simple silk blouse and tailored slacks in muted tones of charcoal and navy. They were clothes designed to fade into the background, to offer no comment, to scream nothing at all. They were the perfect camouflage for the woman they expected me to be. The drive onto Fort Hood felt like crossing a border into a foreign country that was once my home. The familiar cadence of soldiers marching, the rumble of armored vehicles, the sheer scale of the place, it was all the same. Yet I felt utterly alien within it. The VIP parking lot by the Officers Club was already gleaming with polished sedans and high-ranking officials' cars. I drove past it, finding a spot far down by the logistics depot, the gravel crunching under my tires like a forgotten memory. I was not a VIP here. I was an anomaly, a loose thread in the meticulously woven tapestry of military life, and my presence here was a concession, not a celebration. I took a deep breath before stepping out of the car, preparing myself for the quiet battlefield that was my family home. I stepped through the front door into an atmosphere thick with the scent of lemon cleaner and my father's old paperbacks. Nothing had changed. My mother stood in the dining room, her back to me, meticulously arranging printed name cards on the polished wood of the table. Without turning around, she spoke. "Anya, go upstairs and find something else to wear. That blouse is too plain. You and Kira will be seated together, but please do not interrupt her when she makes her speech tomorrow." No hello, no embrace, no acknowledgement of the 10 hours I had just driven to be there. Just a series of instructions, as always, as if I were a new aide-de-camp in need of constant direction. It was a familiar coldness, a welcome as sterile as a field dressing. My father, Raj, emerged from his study, his greeting as formal and practiced as a parade drill. He gave me a firm, almost impersonal pat on the shoulder, a gesture stripped of any real familiarity. "Good. You made it," he said, his eyes already scanning the room behind me, as if searching for someone of actual consequence. It was the way a commanding officer acknowledges a subordinate who has completed a minor expected task. There was a flicker of something that might have been respect, but it was the detached respect for someone who followed an order, not the warm regard of a father for his daughter. He was a colonel to his core, and in his world I was a rankless civilian, a story with a disappointing ending. Just then, Kira made her entrance, and the entire gravitational pull of the house shifted to orbit around her. She was radiant in her dress blues, the polished bars on her shoulders and the colorful ribbons on her chest seeming to generate their own light. She swept through the room with the practiced grace of a diplomat, kissing cheeks, shaking hands, and charming her father's old colleagues with effortless charisma. When her gaze finally fell upon me, standing quietly by the doorway, a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face before she composed it into a placid smile. She gestured toward me with a perfectly manicured hand, her voice carrying across the room with practiced ease, ensnaring everyone's attention for her next pronouncement. "Everyone," Kira announced, her tone bright and magnanimous, "I'd like you to meet my sister Anya." All eyes turned to me, 100 pinpricks of polite curiosity. "She was in the service for a little while," Kira continued, a subtle masterpiece of condescension disguised as familial affection. "Now she's working in government logistics, I believe. Very important paperwork." A few people chuckled, the light, polite sound cutting deeper than any overt insult, because it was clear none of them recognized its cruelty. A cousin leaned in, whispering with feigned sympathy. "So, what is it you do exactly? Filing?" "Well, it's a steady job. Better than nothing, I suppose." I offered a small, closed-lipped smile, a silent refusal to engage, and let the comment die in the air between us. Later, I found myself scanning the walls of the living room, which served as a veritable shrine to my family's military prowess. Every available surface was covered in framed photographs of my father, my mother, and especially Kira, all depicted in various states of uniformed glory. There were graduation portraits, award ceremonies, retirement dinners, and candid shots from officers' balls. I meticulously examined each frame, a silent inventory of my own absence. I finally located the last photograph that had included me, taken just after I had departed West Point. It was a family barbecue from over a decade ago. But my image was severed at the edge, awkwardly cropped to fit a newer, more ornate frame. I had literally been cut out of the family picture. At the small, pre-ceremony dinner that evening, surrounded by family and a few of Kira's senior officers, I felt more like a spectator than a guest. Kira, playing the role of the gracious host, was in her element. At one point, a visiting colonel complimented her poise. She beamed, sipping her wine. "Thank you, sir. I've been practicing my speech," she said. Then, with a casual glance in my direction, she added, "I think it's important for people to know that true strength is about finishing what you start. You can't just walk away from a sacred trust and expect to be remembered for anything other than quitting." The air in the room shifted, the message delivered with surgical precision. It had my name written all over it, and I sat there, absorbing the impact in silence. I escaped to the front porch soon after, the buzz of conversation and laughter inside feeling alien and unwelcome. The cool night air was a relief. In the distance, across the vast expanse of the base, a brass band rehearsed, the mournful notes of a bugle call carrying through the darkness like ghosts of soldiers past. I sat on the top step, watching the wind rustle the leaves of the ancient oak tree in our yard. I had come here for something, though I wasn't sure what. A sign of acceptance? A flicker of recognition? Tomorrow I would sit quietly in the audience, a dutiful sister, and let Kira have her moment in the sun. But truth, I mused, has a way of finding its own voice, and I wondered if mine would ever be heard. The ceremony hall at Fort Hood was a cathedral of command. High vaulted ceilings arched over hundreds of folding chairs arranged in rigid rows, each section delineated by rank and title, a battlefield map without the bullets. Brass light fixtures cast a golden, reverent glow upon the scene. I found my assigned seat in the third row from the back, wedged between a nervous fiancé of a junior officer and someone's perfumed great-aunt. Our row was designated by a small, unassuming sign that read, "Family, Unassigned." It was the military's bureaucratic, impersonal way of saying you were present, but not accounted for. You were here to watch, not to be seen. Up front, Kira stood tall and composed behind the podium, the American flag to her left, the future to her right. Kira began her speech, her voice a finely tuned instrument of confidence and conviction. She spoke of loyalty, of perseverance, of the enduring legacy of the uniform. And then came the part I knew was coming. Her favorite theme. She spoke of the profound importance of distancing oneself from those who had once abandoned that sacred trust, those who chose a simpler, less honorable path. Every word was calculated, every pause choreographed for maximum effect. Her speech wasn't just for her superiors or the rows of decorated officers. It was a message aimed at the ghosts in the room, and she knew one of them was sitting in the back, listening to every carefully chosen cutting word. Just as Kira was hitting her rhetorical stride, the large double doors at the back of the hall swung open. General Thompson entered, not with a grand announcement, but with a quiet weight that seemed to suck the sound out of the room. He was a man who commanded respect without ever having to demand it. His presence alone was enough to make a room of soldiers sit up straighter. He paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the audience, his eyes sharp and discerning. He wasn't looking at the stage or the front rows. He was searching for something, for someone. Then, his eyes locked onto mine, a flash of unmistakable recognition cutting through the cavernous space. The general began to walk, his stride brisk and purposeful. He bypassed the rows of colonels and majors, his path a direct, unwavering line toward the unassigned section in the back. The air around me grew thick with a palpable sense of confusion. Officers turned in their seats, their whispers a low buzz that threatened to drown out my sister's faltering speech. My heart didn't race, and my palms didn't sweat. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, the quiet assurance of a truth about to be brought into the light. He was marching toward me, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the carefully constructed reality of the last 20 years was about to shatter. He came to a halt directly in front of my seat, his heels clicking together with a sound that echoed in the sudden, profound silence. He raised his hand in a salute so sharp, so precise, it was a work of art. It was a gesture of profound, public respect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady and clear, carrying across the frozen auditorium. "Captain Sharma, it is an honor to see you in person." The word ma'am, a title of authority and command, hung in the air, a grenade tossed into the polite fiction of the afternoon. Captain, not logistics clerk, not quitter. Captain. The room didn't just quiet, it ceased to breathe. My sister's voice cracked mid-sentence, the note card in her hand trembling visibly. The applause lines she had so carefully crafted were forgotten, her moment of triumph eclipsed in an instant. She was no longer the star of the show. She was a supporting actor in a play whose plot she had just lost. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother's hand go to her mouth, a silent gasp. My father, who had been sitting with stoic pride, seemed to shrink in his seat, his face a mask of disbelief. Whispers erupted, louder this time. "Sharma?" a young officer behind me muttered. "Is that the Sharma? The one who wrote the doctrine for Operation Nightfall?" I rose slowly to my feet, my movements measured and deliberate. I returned General Thompson's salute, my own form as crisp and sure as his. It wasn't an act of pride or a bid for validation. It was an acknowledgement of a shared world, a silent promise to a man who had trusted me with the lives of his soldiers. The ceremony concluded in a disoriented haze of polite, confused applause. The carefully managed social order had been completely upended. As the guests began to file out, people no longer looked at Kira with pure admiration. Their glances were now tinged with confusion. And they looked at me, the ghost from the back row, with a newfound, unsettling awe. Kira cornered me near the exit as the hall was emptying, her face a storm of fury and humiliation. There was no congratulatory smile, no sisterly embrace. "Why?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Why would you do that to me? You let me stand up there and make a complete fool of myself. Was this your plan all along, to humiliate me?" I looked at her, my expression calm, my voice even. "The truth isn't a weapon, Kira," I said softly, letting the words settle between us. "Unless, of course, you've been living a lie." I walked past her before she could form a reply, the sound of my heels clicking on the polished floor the only response she received. Back in the sterile, impersonal quiet of my guest quarters on base, I felt the day's events settle around me. The adrenaline faded, leaving a hollow echo. Lying squarely on the center of the small desk was a plain manila envelope. It hadn't been there when I left. There was no name, no seal, just an object placed with deliberate intent. My training kicked in, a cold wave of caution. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single printed sheet, a scan of an anonymous email sent to a fringe military blog 2 years prior. The subject line read, reckless operation, unacceptable casualties. It went on to accuse a Captain A. Sharma of commanding an unsanctioned mission that resulted in civilian deaths, urging an investigation. As I read the words, a chill crept down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It wasn't just the false allegation that stopped me cold, it was the specific, nuanced phrasing. The email used terminology and operational details, inaccurate but specific, that were nearly verbatim from a peripheral briefing summary I had reviewed years ago. It was a report with a minimal access roster, an ancillary document prepared for a handful of support staff. A document I knew, with sickening certainty, that my sister Kira had been tasked with archiving during her time as a junior staff officer. It was a clumsy, desperate attempt at sabotage, meant to quietly poison my career from the shadows. Before I could fully process the sting of this intimate betrayal, the base sirens erupted. Not the usual morning bugle, but the sharp, urgent wail of a full-scale security alert. My phone lit up a second later. Emergency protocol active. All personnel with TS-SCI clearance report to SCIF 3 immediately. Muscle memory took over. I was dressed in tactical gear and out the door in under 3 minutes. A real breach had occurred. The entire classified dossier for Operation Nightfall, the very mission whose doctrine I had authored, had just been dumped on the dark web. And the initial forensic trace led back to a dormant process on the base network, a digital mine that had been inadvertently triggered by Kira's 2-year-old malicious email. Within the hour, I was no longer a guest. I was a person of interest in a catastrophic intelligence leak, seated across from General Thompson and 2 grim-faced officials from Military Intelligence Command. I was under a microscope. They didn't accuse me, but the suspicion in the room was as thick as smoke. I knew my sister hadn't intended this. Her petty act of jealousy was the key, but she was just a pawn. Using my own clearance and back-channel access, I ran a deep analysis of the breach. I found it, a sophisticated Trojan horse planted years ago by a rival officer, Commander Marcus Thorne, after I had blocked his promotion. It was designed to activate upon any unauthorized query of my file using Kira's bitterness as his unwitting trigger. I presented my findings to General Thompson in the sterile quiet of the command center. I laid out the digital breadcrumbs, from Kira's foolish email to Thorne's patient, vengeful malware. The general listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When I finished, he stood, walked around the table, and looked not at the screen, but at me. He saw the truth. "This is your investigation now, Captain," he said, his voice firm. "Find Thorne. Unravel this." As I left the briefing, I saw my family standing down the hall, humbled, shaken, and irrelevant to the mission at hand. My mother once told me that some people are meant to support the stars. She never mentioned that sometimes, to find the truth, you have to become a constellation unto yourself, navigating the darkness alone.